Wow, cutting it pretty close there, don't you think, Heavy Metal? Rebecca said, smiling from her floating position outside of Mr. Rock, as the hole in the center of its being began to close in on itself, the rock beginning to rush in around me. I didn't hesitate to take off, clearing way and making my way through the back end of this massive hole that Rebecca had blown in her stone friend. Okay, that's it. I have had enough, I said, as I took off, bolting away before arcing down and around, heading back for Mr. Stone, flying extremely low to the ground and fast. As I extended my hands, and two blades began to form within them, rapidly sweeping through Mr. Stone's legs, slashing out in both directions. As the slashes whipped out, the blades extending themselves, streaking through the form of the stone, severing both legs from off from underneath him, as I bolted out in front, moving with great haste away. As Mr. Stone's legs gave out, separating, as the upper segment of his body began to clatter to the ground, and I turned around, digging my feet into the earth, sliding for about a dozen feet before summoning up spikes that rapidly pulled me to a stop, whilst digging through the earth and dirt, watching Mr. Stone clatter to the ground. As his bottom half hit, a massive impact ring rung out, dust kicked out, flowing outwards from the center of that point of impact. "Come on," I said, staring it down, as unfortunately, by the looks of it, I saw earth and stone beginning to move itself as his body very slowly began to elevate back up. He was growing new legs. At that point, I was just angry. "For the love of all things, just stay down!" I exclaimed, wanting nothing more in that moment than to just put an end to that giant stone barricade. And it was in that moment that the heavy metal summon sprung into action, suddenly whirling into form beside me, shaping itself in a form much like a drill, like it had done before, except now without me attached, as it shot off like a bullet heading for Mr. Stone, barreling into a section that might be acquainted to a belly button of sorts, or at least that's the general area one might be if he were a human, sending Stone flying as it clattered into his shape, boring its way into his body, at which point I continued to hear the clattering of stone as it digged deeper, rapidly moving through its form, and then, one after another, explosions began to erupt from inside of him, sending pieces of large stone flying out from his shape, moving in a zigzag pattern through his form. The heavy metal summon kept detonating, in much the same way it did when it was in his hand, protecting me. The heavy metal summon leaving a streak of destruction in its wake as it moved from location to location, making those massive explosions of force from the inside, sending larger and larger chunks of Mr. Stone flying, making his way up the center of the body, until finally it reached the head and made the entire thing explode, bursting out of the top of it, before its form began to shift again, no longer taking a drill-like shape. Suddenly, the bottom of its body took a shape that I was somewhat familiar with. It was like the jets that I had used when I lifted that piece of stone to hurl at Rebecca. They suddenly flared up, beginning to push the heavy metal summon downwards. Simultaneously, a rush of wind and speed seemed to burst out from below the heavy metal summon where it was traveling, as the front two limbs that had reasserted themselves seemed to form back into those blades, those whip-like tendrils that seemed to start tearing through, severing massive chunks of the stone entity as it flew downwards through its form, seeming to be slowed by the force of the creature trying to reacquire its physical state, form itself back up. However, of the two, the heavy metal summon was destroying it faster than it was rebuilding, until eventually reaching ground level, tearing basically everything apart. The arms clattering to the ground with massive impacts, the earth shaking beneath me as dust and debris kicked up in the distance. And then, like a bullet through the cloud of smoke, bursting through, forming a small hole in it, the heavy metal summon flew in my direction. Rapidly in a liquid state, it swirled back around my form, and once again took the shape that it had decided was best for our mutual cooperation. As I looked at the destruction, I had a thought and a statement. Each differed, but had their own sort of importance. In that moment, the only thing that I could say was, "For the love of God, stay down! Don't get back up, don't put yourself back together, just stay a crumbling pile of rocks. You stupid, stupid rock thing!" I shouted out to it, waiting to see if I heard any sounds of a giant stone monster trying to put itself back together, and was actually very relieved when I heard no such thing, taking a deep sigh of relief, while the thought floating through my head at the time was, "Man, that was cool. This heavy metal summon is definitely working out." It was then, from nearby, I heard a deep growl. "Ah! Okay, so you figured out that it can only put itself back together so long as there's enough of its form left. Impressive," Rebecca's voice said as I looked to the side and saw her standing there, and being fairly surprised she didn't launch a surprise attack. However, she had her arms crossed and was tapping her fingers, somewhat seeming to be annoyed. "So, what even is that thing? I mean, where did it come from? Why couldn't you do that stuff before?" Well, first off, thanks for thinking I'm clever enough to have figured the whole have to destroy enough of its body thing out myself. To be honest, I just got angry. I had no idea that was going to work. I had every reason to suspect that it was just going to put itself back together. But hey, it paid off. And as far as what my heavy metal summon is, I don't suppose I'm actually inclined to have to tell you. "No fair," Rebecca said, which in the moment actually made me chuckle a bit. "Not fair? How so?" I replied. "Well, I explained Felicia's powers, so it's only fair that you explain one of your summon thing's powers. How does it work?" "Well, you did explain Felicia's, but you didn't exactly explain the stone monster. So you're running 50-50 on the explaining things. But you've been pretty generous. I gotta be honest, if you weren't being so nice about it, I probably wouldn't have made it this far. So I suppose it's only fair trade to return the favor. As I said before, this is a new thing for me. It's not exactly something I can explain in a very high level of detail. But for the moment, I'll tell you what I know," I replied, as Rebecca's face seemed to perk up in the moment. "Okay. Basically, it works the same way as my regular abilities work, with a sudden twist. You see, my normal abilities work through, well, telekinetic manipulation. Basically, I use my thought waves to enforce my will and thoughts onto the liquid metal that I produce. It's actually a very unique form of matter that only I can create. Truthfully, it's not actually metal. It just really looks it. But to cut to the chase, the liquid that I produce responds to my thoughts and can take several different forms depending on my intentions and will. and basically any shape I want. Oh, so it is that you're psychic, able to move that stuff around with your mind. I thought as much. But why the difference between that and your creature? Well, primarily, the only real difference is consciousness. You see, normally, I have to control the metal myself, meaning everything that it does has to be a response to my will. I have to focus my thoughts and create form, shape, even concentrate in order to generate movement, speed, destructive power. But that's heavily limited for a number of reasons. Primarily because, well, I'm kind of new at this. I've only recently started in the superhero game, you know. I may have picked up popularity fast, but as far as superheroing goes, I haven't even been doing it a year. Actually, only about 2 months. So suffice it to say, it's really hard to focus on using the metal and moving around and doing stuff myself. The heavy metal summon, the creature that I created, basically removes the need for me to focus. It's actually fairly interesting. You see, the liquid metal that I produce apparently holds memories, recollections of how me and my telekinetic wavelength interact with it. Every time that I make it move, take a shape, give it a purpose or intention, a direction to travel, I imbue some of myself into the liquid, some of my personality, who I am, what I believe, my hopes, desires, dreams. Little fragments of all of that get imbued into the metal, and over time, it learns to respond to me just as I learn to control it. Basically, it's a two-way learning streak. The harder I work at learning how to control it, the more information it gets from me that allows me to more easily do so. But the big barrier is that regardless of how easy I make it, it always still requires focus and concentration from me. But this creature that I created, for the moment calling it Heavy Metal Summon, still gotta come up with a name for what I summoned. But when you basically break it down, it's essentially the soul of the metal, the aspects of myself and my will that have been imbued within it over time. And just like the metal before, it can pick up on my telekinetic wavelength, my thoughts, emotions, intentions, and, unlike me, the liquid metal is its natural state. It's its body, not separate. Just like you don't really have to think that hard in order to walk or run, it doesn't have to think that hard in order to move and do things. So, it's exceptionally better at utilizing its body than I am. And not only that, as an added bonus, it's actually pretty fond of me. Loyal, you might say. But I suppose that only fits. After all, it is made from fragments of my personality, intentions, and will. Oh, that makes sense. That's why it never tried any of that slashy stuff on me. You don't want to kill me. And since your intentions aren't that of trying to kill me, neither are its, I replied, ending her statement for her. You catch on quick. So, basically, that summon of yours massively amplifies your abilities by cutting out the need to focus on any of the things that it produces. Rather, it responds to your telekinetic wavelength, allowing you full control over yourself, while being able to instinctually respond to your thoughts and intuitions. That is pretty cool. The soul of the metal. I like it. As she said the words, I couldn't help but chuckle a bit. You know what? You actually just gave me a great idea. I think I figured out what I'm gonna call it. Heavy Metal Spirit. What do you think? Way cool, Rebecca replied. That is so catchy. But I mean, the whole heavy metal thing is really just catchy itself. I mean, how did you even come up with the name? I scratched my head a bit. Well, to be honest, I actually came up with the name by accident. If you had seen the video online, you'd know. But I was in sort of a brawl and giving a guy what's for about being an asshole. And I got a little worked up, made some statements, and it ended up being my superhero name. So, to be honest, my name was a complete goof. A total accident. It's kind of hysterical, don't you think? Rebecca began to chuckle to herself. That definitely sounds like you. At least as far as I know you. Which I have every intention of spending a fair amount of time getting to know you in the future as well. Well, now that that's all settled, I suppose we ought to get back to this fight, right? In the moment, Rebecca pulled out her blade again, swirling it around in her hand, extremely dexterously. She was exceptionally good at it. I couldn't have said it better myself.